the wisdom and the insights, the foundations of your faith are so needed in this moment. I believe, firmly believe, that we are in the midst of a third Reconstruction in America. And if we fully grasp the power of the moral fusion, intersectional movement building that produced the first two Reconstructions, we can bring this Reconstruction into full existence. And if we understand the deconstructive tactics that always begin whenever there is a move to a reawakening or a reconstruction or a revival to help this nation move a little bit closer to being a more perfect union, we can not be so much in despair, but understand what we must do now. 48 years ago, I think it was, maybe 49 now, Dr. King gave a speech on March the 14th at Grosse Pointe High School outside of Detroit. It was one of Dr. King's last public speeches before he was assassinated in Memphis 3 weeks later. He said this: "I'm worried about America." He said, every city in our country has a kind of dualism. This schizophrenia split at so many parts. There are two Americas. There was a book written during that time he was rifting from. He was, as my hip-hop friends say, he was sampling from. One America, he said, is beautiful for its situation. In this America, millions of people have the milk of prosperity and the honey of equality flowing before them. This America is the habitat of millions of people who have food and material necessities for their bodies and culture and education for their minds and freedom and human dignity for their spirits. But there's another America. This other America has a daily ugliness about it that transforms the buoyancy of hope into the fatigue of despair. And he said, "I'm worried about America." He had said it also December 10th, 1967 in a speech entitled "The Meaning of Hope," but he started with despair. "I'm worried about America." America, a country that says all persons are equal, still wrestling with racism. I'm worried about America. And I want to suggest to you tonight, I'm worried about America. And you ought to be worried too, but not to despair. But we ought to take it very seriously. When you can have a former presidential candidate go on television to challenge a current presidential candidate, as Romney did today, as he took on, or said he was taking on Trump. And he opens his conversation by saying that he's standing up like Ronald Reagan stood when he supported Barry Goldwater. And the media misses that. Barry Goldwater was against civil rights, pro-war. He was against desegregation. Ronald Reagan defended him. And Romney opened his talk today saying the only time something like this had happened before is when Reagan stood up to support Goldwater. He said, and remember, we lost, and look at what happened. Now, I couldn't get my head around that. I mean, was he trying to say, what was he trying to say? Was he trying to say that Cruz and Rubio and Kasich are like Barry Goldwater and we ought to support them? Was he saying Trump was like Barry Goldwater, or was it that he just didn't know what he was saying? And then he said that Rubio and Kasich and these folk were the alternative to Trump. But I'm not endorsing anybody, but I'm just reading their website. They believe in war. They supported the Iraq war. They believe in war on poor people. They believe in war on the immigrants. They believe on war against women and the right to vote. And they are the alternative. Oh, maybe what he was saying was, we don't mind bigotry as long as people are cute and know how not to say it out loud like Trump. And if that's what he's really saying, then Trump's not the real con man. Because at least he's saying what he believes. A con man will never say exactly what he believes. And that's the point. And when that can happen, and the media doesn't even, they talk about how great the speech was and how strong it was, and they don't even make the connection. I'm worried about America. I'm worried about America. And I believe that it's important to educate people on the power of the First and Second Reconstructions, rooted in the idea of moral fusion politics, because it provides the imagination and mechanism to fundamentally shift history and the socio-political trajectory of the nation. We need to learn from the First and Second Reconstructions and how we can apply those lessons in this moment, but we also must learn about the resistance and the things that were done to deconstruct the First and Second Reconstruction, because then we will not say what so many people are saying and so many of the media are saying. We've never seen this before. Yes, we have. Your history knows that. We've seen this before. What before? Well, let's take a look. The first Reconstruction took place in the shadow of slavery and amid the wreckage of the Civil War. Using this moral framework, African Americans joined hands with white former farmers in the South and some allies in the North who were willing to come together. Within 4 years, black and white coalitions ended up controlling every state house in the South. In fact, many of them had majority black legislators. And within 4 years after slavery, together, using a moral framework, they rewrote state constitutions, like North Carolina's constitution. They rewrote it to say things like this: we hold it to be self-evident that all persons are created equal, endowed by their creator with certain inalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, the enjoyment of the fruit of their own labor, and the pursuit of happiness. They guaranteed public education as a constitutional right in the South. 48 years ago. They passed the 13th Amendment ending slavery. They then passed the 14th Amendment, equal protection under the law, upon which so many of our rights today for women and immigrants and the disabled come from. The 15th Amendment, which protected the right to vote for men, but they laid the foundation for the 19th Amendment that would be passed to open up the right to vote for women. They built the first public schools. They made, as I said, education a public right. They extended the ballot to all men, regardless of color. They were talking about labor rights in 1868, long before the Knights of Labor came south, long before the AFL-CIO, because they knew that blacks and whites needed a living wage, and without a wage and without labor rights, you could not have the enjoyment of the fruit of your labor. And whenever you don't enjoy the fruit of your own labor, that's just a pseudo form of slavery. They guaranteed people protection under the law. This is 1868. Blacks and whites working together. They embraced new rules for the courts, ensured that blacks could sit on juries and give evidence in the court. They expanded democracy. But after 4 years of this powerful experiment of Reconstruction, that Reconstruction began to face immoral, powerful opposition. Many former Confederates saw the black citizenship and black leadership connected with white leadership as inherently illegitimate. And they first went after white people. The Klan was in some ways formed to first attack white people, not black people. North Carolina, it wasn't some backroom person with a straw in his mouth that became the founder of the Klan. It was leaders at the University of North Carolina. Colonel Sanders was his name. Leaders at the University of North Carolina. They attacked African American leaders. They killed many of them. They began to wail against taxes. The first arguments about cutting taxes began around 1872, 74, 75, 76. The argument was, if we cut taxes, then the government can't keep its promises to the former slave. It couldn't fulfill the post-slavery economy and lift up those white allies and black allies who were working together. They hated public schools. They railed against any kind of involvement in the court system. They didn't want black and white children to be educated at the same level. Then they went after the courts. Did you know that the Civil Rights Act that was passed in 1875 made it a felony for somebody not to allow black people to be served in a business? But in 1883, it was overturned. It was overturned. They went after the courts, and they slowly began to put more people on the court who were, quote unquote, conservative or extreme. And then after they went after the courts, then they went after the ballot box. Or kind of simultaneously they did that. They didn't undo the 15th Amendment. They just began to put up all kinds of impediments. They abridged the right to vote. They took over the court. The Tea Party, wrong century. I'm sorry, but you get my point. They took over the courts. They took over the courts. And when they finally took over the Supreme Court, there wasn't but one dissenter. His name was Justice Harlan out of Kentucky. And you know what their mantra was? You know what their marching orders were? You know what they said? They said, we are the redeemers. Sounds real good, doesn't it? We are the redeemed. This is the redemption movement. But when you press that, what did they mean by redemption? They meant redeeming America from black and white fusion politics. Fusion moral politics that was changing the nation. And by the way, they also said, we have come to take back America and make America great again. I mean, I'm in the 19th century. I haven't even gotten, They use moral messaging for immoral activity. Sounds familiar? Then in 1896, they get Plessy versus Ferguson. And then after Plessy versus Ferguson, they shut down almost all the voting. Voting in the black community goes down to virtually zero. The last black person, who happened to be from North Carolina, George White, was run out of the United States Congress. And then you begin to get the riots of the late 1800s and early 1900s, the Wilmington Riots, where they actually killed more people on November the 10th, 1898 than were killed on September the 11th in New York, per capita. And they attacked black and white people who were duly elected, ran them out of office. You get the Springfield riots. And by the time Woodrow Wilson gets in the Oval Office, the great professor from Princeton University, but he shows the film Birth of the Nation as a signal that the first Reconstruction is over. And by the way, the author of the book, Birth of a Nation, is from North Carolina, Shelby. And Dalen Ruth, who killed all those people in Mother Emanuel, was caught near the street that's named after the author of Birth of a Nation. And so the First Reconstruction is ended. We see both the power, the possibility of moral fusion politics, but we also see how hard forces will fight to deconstruct Reconstruction. Then you get the Second Reconstruction, 1954. I like to name it, date it, some historians as well. Blacks, whites, Latinos, young people began to come together, Christians, Jews, Catholics come together, willing to march and suffer. They built this fusion movement. 1954, you get the Brown decision. Thurgood Marshall goes in with Jewish and white and black lawyers, but he doesn't just argue the law, he argues morality. He says the only way the court can agree with this is that you agree that we must keep the former slave as close to slavery as possible. That's his closing argument. All 9 justices, even one former Ku Klux Klan member, votes unanimous at the end, Plessy versus Ferguson. Charles and David Koch's daddy, Freddie Koch, has a hissy fit. He calls for the impeachment of Earl Warren over that decision, and Eisenhower. 1955, Emmett Till gets killed. as a reaction, some say, to the Brown decision. Mamie Till makes a decision. I'm going to let everybody see this. I'm not covering my baby. This will be an open casket funeral. Rosa Parks sees it, the pictures in Jet magazine. She goes to Highlander. She gets trained, civil disobedience. When the killers are acquitted, Rosa Parks says, we got to go after Jim Crow. She sits down, and she wasn't some little, read the book, The Radical Life of Rosa Parks by my good friend Jean Theo Harris. Rosa Parks was something else, and she was strong. And she sits down against her nation because she wasn't originally nonviolent, but she sits down, and that allows Martin and Bayard and others to stand up, and we see the beginning of the Second Reconstruction. And here, in this time, what do we get? We get the March on Washington. We get the '64 Civil Rights Act. We get the beginnings of desegregation. We get Medicaid, Medicare, expansion of Social Security, economic opportunity, war on poverty. In 1960, before we launched the war on poverty, 35% of American seniors live in wrenching poverty. By 1975, child poverty has been cut in half, and poverty among seniors was reduced by over 60%. And people say we lost the war on poverty. No, we retreated. You get funding for K-12 and Pell Grants and higher education, and all of these programs begin to enjoy broad support, and they're rooted in a moral argument. Russell Sage actually says that the programs of the war on poverty had three parts. The first part was to raise wages. The second was to provide income support for single mothers and the elderly. And the third was to bring a system of government health care to the elderly. But there was one other part to the war on poverty, and it was that Medicare funds were withheld from hospitals if they didn't comply with the Civil Rights Act of '64. And so that's how many hospitals were desegregated. That's the Second Reconstruction. And their arguments, the people that marched, you were there, some of you were there. Y'all didn't march as Democrats or Republicans or left is right. You marched for moral reasons. Moral fusion, intersectional issues in the streets, in the courts, in the legislative suites. Fusion. Addressing racism and poverty was spoken of as moral imperative. Presidents would go to the floor, the well of the House, and talk about moral imperative. 2 years after the March on Washington, blood was in the streets. People sacrificed. And then you get the Voting Rights Act. Politicians didn't change. Lyndon Baines Johnson, the former segregation, didn't want to do it. But black and white people, and Jews and Christians and Quakers and Catholics started marching, putting their lives at risk. They changed the context in which politicians had to exist. We get the Voting Rights Act. Who introduces it? A Republican and a Democrat. Mike Mansfield, a Democrat, Eric Dirksen, a Republican. March 18, 1965, just a few days after, 11 days after Bloody Sunday. And then it's signed into law August 6, 1965. When you get the passage of this bill, African-American voting participation goes up incredibly. 1948, only 15% of black population was even registered. By 1962, it had gone to 36%. But after the 65 Voting Rights Act, 1 year later, 66, 51% of African Americans were suddenly registered and participating. And then what happened? The Dixiecrats, the extremists, revolted. They couldn't stand it. They turned to violence and terror. They killed Malcolm, Martin, and Medgar, and Viola Russa, and James Reed, and many, many others. They decided we got to have another movement. Now, we had the redemption movement to stop the first Reconstruction. What do we need? Oh, okay. Southern strategy. And guess what their mantra was? We must take back America. We must make America great again. We must redeem America. What was the goal of the white Southern strategy? Number one, we got to reframe moral issues. We can't have people talking about poverty and education as moral issues. We got to limit moral issues. Let's say, abortion, prayer in the school, and homosexuality. The moral imperative was removed. They worked hard to get it out of the public discourse. The progress that was once popularized became racialized. The very things that had been popular, that had lifted many whites out of poverty and desperation, now became racialized. Those other people, undeserving people, are getting something. And then they revolted at black citizenship. They believed that the society was excessively open, and they launched a backlash of retrenchment. They talked about cutting support, cutting taxes, cutting money for public schools, draining education. Doesn't help that in the middle of this we went into the Vietnam War. Kevin Phillips, they kind of used the Vietnam War like people used the Iraq War as an excuse to cut money and to put more money in war and the promulgation of death than the lifting up of life. Kevin Phillips, Nixon's Republican strategist, said this white Southern strategy, he says, this is the strategy, to deliberately play the race card in a way that drives Southern whites and suburban whites in the North to vote for politicians, leave the ranks of the Democratic Party that had elected persons like John Kennedy and Lyndon Baines Johnson, and to vote against their own self-interest without them knowing they're going to do what they're doing, without them feeling like they're racist. And then you get Lee Atwater, who's on tape one day talking to somebody, and he asked him, said, are you taping this? And the man said, yes, and he kept talking, so I guess he must have wanted us to hear it. And Lee Atwater says, this is what we decided to do. He said, you start out in 1954 saying nigger, nigger, nigger to get elected. But by 1968, you can't say that word. It'll hurt you. It'll backfire you. You got to disavow that word. Watch me now. You got to disavow that word. So you start saying things like, I'm against forced busing. I'm for states' rights. You get very abstract. You talk about cutting taxes. And it sounds like you're just making an economic argument. But the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites, and whites are taught that blacks and brown people are the sum total of their problems. And what was the target of the Southern strategy? The old Confederacy. Why? Because if you get all 13 former Confederate states in a presidential election, you get 162 electoral votes, which means from the other 37 states, you only need 110 votes. If you can control the southern states, you control the legislatures, you control the Congress, you control the governors. And what do the governors control? They control all of the boards of elections. And who sits on the boards of election? Southern strategy. But the only way you can do this is you got to break up political fusion coalition. You can't allow these moral coalitions to form. Who used it first? George Herbert Walker Bush used it. When he ran for the Senate and he declared himself emphatically opposed to the Civil Rights Act of '64. This is what he said. The new Civil Rights Act was passed to protect 14% of the people. I'm worried about the other 86%. Now, he doesn't never say the N-word. I never say the N-word, but that's what he's saying. I'm not into protecting the black folk. I'm into protecting these 86% of the white folk. George Wallace began using this strategy in the mid-1960s. He said he began to use it in his 1968 campaign. Dan Carter said George Wallace became the most influential loser in American politics because he laid down how you do it, how you con America, how you con white voters. He taught the so-called conservative far right how to use the language of anti-elitism, anti-communism, and racial code words to inflame white voters with fear and hatred of others. How to hate the anti-war movement, the counterculture movement, and the women's liberation movement. He lost, but he showed folk how to do it, how to speak the language of racism without sounding like a racist. And part of the problem is many of the folk in the media and other folk, they don't know this history, they don't study this history. So that's why they say from CNN to MSNBC, we've never seen this before. Yes, you have. In fact, let me this speech, our system is under attack. The property system, the free enterprise system, the local government. The American people are not going to stand by and see the security of our nation put in peril. I can assure you that. Both parties have brought us to a mess now. We're in a mess in our foreign mess. Both parties have put us in a domestic mess. What am I going to do? when I become president? Well, I'm going to turn it back to you. I'm going to give it back to you. The right to control your school boards, the right to control things locally. We got all these pseudo-intellectuals and theoreticians and professors and some newspaper editor, and the media and these judges and these preachers. They've looked down their noses long enough at the average man on the street, the pipe fitter, the communication workman, the fireman, the policeman, the barber, the white-collar worker. I can do it. I can get us back in the game again. We can be great again. That's not Trump. That's Wallace. 1968, Madison Square Garden, running for president. Then Richard Nixon learned how to out-Wallace Wallace. Nixon learned to speak in a new racially coded language that capitalized on fears and prejudices. And by 1969, historian Bill Chaffee says that most middle-class whites all over the country, not just in the South, believed that blacks had a better chance of getting a good education, jobs, and housing than they did. And almost 80% said that most people on welfare could earn their own way if they wanted to, and did not even recognize that the majority of people on welfare were white. Nixon used his Southern strategy to establish the Sun Belt power for the Republican Party. Phillips advised Nixon that the Republican Party could win without Negro votes if you painted the Democrat as the black party. And Phillips predicted a new American revolution coming out of the South and the West. In other words, the South and the so-called Rust Belt, because of the fears and the objections raised by the Civil Rights Movement victory. And he noted also, listen, that white ethnics in the North were also ripe for the picking. Now, 1968, many Southern white conservatives, Jesse Helms, Strom Thurmond, left the Democratic Party, came into the Republican Party, and in the end, it was Ronald Reagan who finally capitalized. That's why I couldn't understand I think I know what Romney was saying. It was Ronald Reagan that capitalized on the Southern strategy. In 1980, they nominated their darling, a man who was a great actor. And where did he go? Where did he stage one of his opening campaign events? Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Swanner, Cheney, and Goodman had been murdered. He had an event right down the street from the Neshoba County. Never said the N-word. Never said, I'm trying to split black and white people together, but this is what he did say. He called the Civil Rights Act bad legislation that infringed upon the individual rights of citizens. He referred to the Voting Rights Act as a humiliation to the South, his central theme was states' rights. He talked about welfare queens and people who drove fleets of Cadillac purchased with food stamps. And he claimed to be in the grocery store line beside a strapping young buck with a fistful of stamps and a stack of porterhouse steaks. Never says the N-word, but he's using race all the time, the coded lexicon of the Southern strategy. And Reagan won by a landslide with the white vote in the South. And guess who his policies hurt more than anybody? Poor whites in the South that were conned by the Southern strategy in voting against their own self-interest and helping to bring an end to the Second Reconstruction. But in the midst of that story, both of those, there lies a roadmap for today. We must begin to think in terms of building out this third Reconstruction that I believe has been birthed. The signs are here that there's a third Reconstruction afoot. The election of President Obama, not all his policies, because I don't agree with all his policies, but the kind of campaign he run that broke through in the South. He won in places like Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina. That's significant. Florida, South Carolina, North Carolina had never voted, for instance, for even a Democrat, a white Democrat. And yet he won in North Carolina. New electorate, blacks and whites and young people. Demographic shifts. Now, if 30% of the unregistered black voters register in the South and they join with white progressives and Latinos, the Southern strategy is in trouble. In Georgia, in Mississippi, in Florida, in Virginia, and in North Carolina. Then we got all these movements breaking out all over the place. You got the clerk of the AFC talking about revisiting our 100th years. That's a sign. We can't rest on our laurels. You got Quaker hip hop talking about let them all in. That's a sign of a third Reconstruction. You've got Fight for 15, young black and white Latinos coming together in this country all over. That's a sign. You have Moral Mondays, you got Black Lives Matter, you have the environmental movement happening. Signs that we are seeing a third Reconstruction. And I believe that's why there's so much fight back. Because the first Reconstruction, it took them 14 years to stop it. The second Reconstruction, it took from 54 to 1980 to fully stop it. That's 26 years. And I believe those who are the deconstruction or the cousin of the deconstructors are trying now to kill it in its infancy. Because they know the power. If we hook up and align ourselves in this moral fusion intersexual movement,